Hello, students. Miss Paulson here with your weekly update to all things environmental in the legislature. Well, let's be honest, some things environmental in the legislature. It is week 2 of session. Today is Thursday, January 18th, day 11. It's been a pretty exciting week here amongst all the public hearings and policy committees and constituents meeting with their legislators. It was also super cold here on the Capitol campus. It even froze the Tivoli fountain. So, legislative process-wise, what has been going on with our 3 pieces of legislation? Let's start with Senate Bill 5884, our Environmental Crimes Bill. Now, we saw the public hearing last week, and now it is scheduled for an executive session tomorrow, Friday, January 19th at 8 a.m. It is there where they will vote whether to pass it out of committee so it can move on to the next step of the legislative process. Now, hopefully, you're asking to yourself, what is that next step? Well, because it does not have a fiscal note attached, meaning it doesn't cost any money to implement, and Marissa talked about that last week. If it's voted out of committee, it will move into the Rules Committee. To learn more about the different types of committees, watch the Civics 101 videos posted below on the feed. And now, for HB 2049, the REWRAP Act, it had its executive session this morning where the representatives considered a proposed substitute bill by Representative Berry. If you remember, she's the prime sponsor. You can kind of think of a substitute bill by the original sponsor as like a really big amendment. It's clear that Representative Berry wanted more support for this bill, so she made some changes that would garner that support. Marissa is going to talk more about the politics behind this in her video. Take a look at the Civics 101 videos posted below to learn more about amendments and kind of how they work. Additionally, a fiscal note has been provided for this bill. The fiscal note is 68 pages long. This is another way to know that this bill is really complicated. A fiscal note details a few things. Overall, it talks about how much money the bill is going to cost over the next 10 years or so. It's going to tell us from which budget the money comes from, the operating budget, the capital budget, or the transportation budget. And here's where it really gets complicated, especially if you don't like spreadsheets. If you do like spreadsheets, this is where you want to tune in. Specifically, it's going to talk about each state agency and how they are going to spend the money. How many people they have to hire to implement the law. What goods and services do they need to implement the law, like staples and paper and probably more things than that, and how long will they be spending this money for. The state agency that this bill is really focused on, although there are many, is the Department of Ecology, because that's the agency that's going to run this legislation. This bill was passed out of committee this morning at a vote of 8-7, very narrow. It will now head over to the House Appropriations Committee, where they will then hold yet another public hearing, although this one will probably be a little bit more on the financial aspects of the bill. So stay tuned. Now, for my favorite bill, the Beaver Bill. This bill had a public hearing on Monday, January 15th in the Senate Agriculture, Water, Natural Resources, and Parks Committee. That's a really long name. And like the hearing for the REWRAP Act, this hearing was long and impassioned. Unlike the REWRAP Act, Senator Vandeweghe did not narrow down how long people could talk. There were 9 people who testified in favor of the bill, including a representative from the Tulalip tribe, and they've been managing the beaver population on their lands for a long time. Also, the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife testified, and they would be in charge of managing the beaver ecosystems if this bill gets passed into law. 3 people testified against the bill, including a representative from the Washington Farm Bureau. They had concerns about how this new legislation would impact landowners who had beavers on their land. This also had a fiscal note attached, which details how and when the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife would spend the money to protect beaver ecosystems. The fiscal note for this one was only 5 pages long. Next Thursday, it has an executive session where we can see if it's passed out to move on to the Senate Ways and Means Committee, which is their fiscal committee. What does this all mean? It means that all three of our bills are still alive. But remember that the chairs of the committees, including the fiscal committees, wield a lot of power. And they're going to decide whether these bills get put up for a vote or not. Remember, just because they're scheduled for executive session does not mean that they're going to actually get one. So we're still waiting and seeing, but remember, all bills need to be out of their policy committee by January 31st, or they will die. And only, on average, 1 out of every 7 bills actually makes it into law. So stay tuned for next week, where we're going to see where our 3 pieces of legislation are. Looking forward to seeing you then.